Get started, shall we? Because we're past the hour. So good morning, everyone. As General Secretary of NSCAD, it is my absolute joy to welcome all of you to the 2024 iJADE conference. iJADE, of course, is the research journal for our art and design education community, founded by NSCAD and published in partnership with Wiley. And this conference is very much your conference. So it is really a pleasure to welcome you all here today. I haven't got much to say, but I do want to begin where we will also end, which is with absolute thanks to everybody who's committed time, research, thinking, energy to preparing this conference. There's a huge number involved in that, including you, the delegates. So yeah, thank you everyone who's going to present a paper over the next 2 days of conference, to those who are going to inspire and challenge us with their keynotes. We're certainly going to get that. To the iJADE editorial board, to the folks at Liverpool Hope who'll be hosting us on Saturday, to the NSCAD team and Diane Quinn in particular, but especially I have to say the leadership team of iJADE, Dr. Claire Penketh and Dr. Emma Manash, who have really brought together an outstanding programme. They've pulled together their research interests and expertise to create something that I believe is going to be very special. So we've got a real treat ahead of us. Before I hand over to Claire, I just want to do some housekeeping, if I may. The first thing is to say the conference code, which is in the conference packs, is very much about a spirit of hospitality to ideas and each other, to be supportive and friendly. That is the environment we wish to create. In terms of the organisation of the conference over the next 2 days, we're online today, and then on Saturday we'll be up at Liverpool Hope, and I know that many of you are going to be joining us there. Hopefully the day in between will give you space for travel and reflection on what unfolds today online. But we've got, 41 papers being presented today, as well as some fantastic keynote presentations. So 2 parallel sessions happening this morning and then the afternoon. Hopefully everybody knows, if you're presenting a paper, which room you're in. If you don't and you have any queries, please direct message Diane Quinn, who's here manning the desks on this Zoom. Likewise, if you've got a particular parallel session that you wish to attend, during the break, please could you directly message Diane, and she will sort that out, because she's going to be organising those breakout rooms. But other than that, really just enjoy what will be, as I said already, a very, very special hybrid 2-day conference. May I hand over to formally open iJADE 2024 to our principal editor, Dr. Claire Penketh.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Welcome, everybody. Brilliant that you're here. Welcome to our 2024 conference for iJADE, International Journal of Art and Design Education. And just to remind everybody, we've been running conferences since 2010. I'm saying reminding everybody, but everybody had to remind me the date that we actually started. So we've been, we've got a real legacy of conferences and, bringing people together on a range of different topics. But I have to say a big thanks to Emma Manash, our editorial manager for iJADE. And I know Michelle's already thanked Emma, but it's really important to recognise that Emma proposed and developed this conference theme. And it's a theme that reflects her own academic experience, expertise and commitment. The significance and relevance of peace is reflected in the range of papers and keynote presentations, with over 60 papers over the 2 days of the conference. So Emma notes in our conference programme, in response to UNESCO's recently published Peace Education Strategy, which highlights the importance of peace education in its efforts to bring about lasting global peace, we might consider the implications for art and design education. So we're recognising the centrality of these debates to art education and what that means for art and design education. There'll be opportunities to reflect on the conditions under which peace thrives or diminishes during the conference, the role of art and design educators in creating spaces to imagine what's described as a just new world, and the potential of socially engaged and relational art design practices to promote ongoing peace processes. And I recognise that it's been quite a difficult week for people in lots of ways. I think that the conference is timely. Unfortunately, these dialogues and debates are always timely. Our first keynote speaker, though, speaks directly to this agenda as the UNESCO Chair for Issues-Based Arts Education. Johnston's director of the International Masters Artist Educator and leads the ARTES site-specific education programme in Morocco, Netherlands and Ireland. He's the first UNESCO Chair to be awarded to an arts institution in the Netherlands and the first in the unit to win dedicated to issue-based arts education and conflict prevention. And I'm pretty sure that he's the first UNESCO Chair that we've had presenting at an iJADE conference. So we're absolutely thrilled that John's recognised and had this opportunity to talk about his important work here. John explains that he came to this point in his work via many roads, underlining the importance of his lived experience while growing up in war-torn Northern Ireland. And this offers a starting point for his keynote address, Empathetic, Objective. It's all about connection. So many thanks, John, to joining us for this conference. John will be here today, first thing in the morning. He's going to set up an arts-based activity for us in the afternoon, and that's going to create a really nice bridge over into the Saturday conference as well. And we'll tell you more about that as the day goes on. So we're very pleased to have John for this initial keynote and later. So thank you, John. I'm going to hand over to you, and you're very, very welcome.
Thank you, Claire. And welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all, wherever you're joining us from. I'm going to go through maybe about 20 or 30 slides, which are going to explain the nature of the chair that I've been lucky enough to gain at ARTES, but also some of the work which has led to the award of the chair. So I'm going to share a screen with you. I'm going to put you on a holding slide for a moment or two and read a little bit about the background to this and set a context for it. Okay. First of all, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the editorial team and the board of iJADE for inviting me to talk and share some ideas with you on the subject of peace and what I see as the intrinsic connection between peace building and art education. If the subject of peace was already urgent, the events of the past few days has raised this urgency to a point of alert. As Claire says, my name is John Johnston. I currently hold the inaugural UNESCO Chair in Issues-Based Art Education at ARTES, University of the Arts, here in the Netherlands. I am also, as Claire mentioned, the head of the International Master Artist Educator Programme, a programme that I designed and introduced 7 years ago here at the university. The programme's main intention was to enable a new generation of artist educators to come forward, to take their place and to engage with some of the most critical issues of our times. In March this year, with the support of the board of ARTES, I applied to host the UNESCO Chair here at the university. The chair was awarded by the Unit Commission in Paris in June for a period of 4 years. In this time, I and my small team will attempt to gather evidence that will show this interconnectivity between art, education, and peace building. I'm doing this on the basis of 2 sources of inspiration. My personal lived experiences drawn from, as Claire mentioned, my early life in Belfast, and my professional experience, as I believe that art education is greatly undervalued and underutilised in the field of international affairs, but particularly conflict prevention. Although my main base is in the city of Arnhem, a city with its own what could be described as visceral connection to war, I also work in 2 other sites that we call site-specific colleges, one in Belfast and the other in Rabat, Morocco. For obvious reasons, I'll be drawing heavily on my connection to Belfast as I go through this presentation, and will also use examples of student work realised there in the past 2 years to illustrate the challenges and potential of art when set within a specific contested space. Before working at ArtTest, I taught at Goldsmiths on the PGCE and MA Artist Teacher programme. I also had studied at Goldsmiths to be an art teacher many years before, and it was then that I let the head of programme at that time, Dennis Atkinson, who had seen my work and heard my story at interviews, sent me to Crofton School in Lewisham for the first teaching practice. Little did I know then how profound that decision would turn out to be. The teachers and pupils of Crofton shone a light on a way of doing art education that I had not seen or experienced in my own schooling. They called it issues-based art. The approach forefronts meaning, purpose, values, and reasoning as the main inspiration for learning. I saw, but most importantly, I felt its force immediately when I walked into the department for the first time. In my final essay for my PGCE, I recounted that moment by writing, all the students had shared venture to give meaning to their world, to claim agency over their lived experience, and present this back to the world in an effort to understand their purpose, their values, and their reason. It is a deeply political act of reclamation. The following year, I returned to Crofton as head of department, and although I left 4 years later, I took with me the inspiration of that time. And now, as I talk to you today, as a UNESCO Chair in issues-based art education, a title or ideal would not exist without the knowledge and vision of a few teachers and multiple kids in what Ofsted once called a failing school. By and large, I think I'm talking to people working in the field of art education, be that in research, teaching, project leadership, or a combination of all three and more. Many of you may work in the formal sector, schools, colleges, universities, etc., while others may be based in the informal, community, or social sectors. Whatever the case, we are all vested in the endeavour of what Gert Biesta describes as the beautiful risk of education. I see this simply because we have chosen to turn up, to be here to discuss the vital topic of peace. And peace requires beauty, it requires risk, and it requires education. Norwegian Johan Galtung, often described as the father of peace studies, once coined the phrase that peace can be described as the absence of war. He went on to explain this as a negative peace, a point that I'll come back to later. However, what is clear to me is that war and conflict provide us with a wealth of material evidence in the form of the destruction of buildings, homes, infrastructure, and lives. On the other hand, peace seems to be an unobtainable entity without object or form. Peace is more ephemeral, and for that reason, I prefer to add the word process to our title. Process also talks more readily to our work, be it as teachers and educators, as in our professional lives, we rarely, if ever, see the product of our endeavours, the so-called finished article. We do see punctuations, moments in time, when particles of life combine and offer us an insight into what could be. In a moment, I will try to illustrate my experiences and thoughts on the subject of peace, but before I start, I do have a little warning for you. My talk, like much of my work, is full of contradictions. It presents multiple turns that took me, my students, and colleagues on journeys into territories known and unknown. And I ask you to accept these contradictions because they highlight something I feel that is crucial to peace building, that is doubt and uncertainty. I am never sure, I am never complete, and while I borrow ideas and turns from others, I am never confident that I'm using these words in the right way. That is how the author intended them to be used. My lens is cloudy, marked with multiple experiences that go toward making me who I am, a creature of doubt. I do not know what peace is. I have an idea what it may feel like in a given moment, but I cannot hold it in my hand and show it to you. And if I did, you should be very worried. In this wonderful book, How to Cure a Fanatic, Israeli writer Amos Oz draws attention to the definition of a fanatic as someone or a group who have no doubt. They believe in absolute truth, so much so that they're willing to kill you to prove it. And if their truth is still not believed, they're also willing to kill your family. The slide which has accompanied this preamble, Prepared for Peace and Ready for War, sits to this day on the end wall of a house in North Belfast, an area that I grew up in. The mural teaches us, excuse me, the mural teaches us something about the community that lives in its shadow. It provides an insight into the nervous system of society recovering from conflict, a conflict that claimed the lives of over 3,800 people. Small numbers when compared to Ukraine, Gaza, and the broader Middle East and other conflicts around the world. But it was the nature of the conflict that is shared with all places of war. Terror, sheer terror. Your nervous system is at its optimum. Adrenaline is constantly driving through your bloodstream. Peace takes time. It involves healing, it involves curiosity, but also involves unlearning and breaking old patterns of thought and action. Education, and in particular art education, must and should be a central aspect of peace education. I hope my opening words have sparked your curiosity to what you're about to see, to want to know more. As I go through the following slides, I hope you will, in your own way and in your own time, want to connect to this UNESCO Chair. Because although it may bear my name, it does not belong to me. It belongs to all those who contribute to its cause. Thank you. Peace. I'm going to explore the subject of peace through my lived experience and professional experience, as mentioned in the preamble. Lived is what I feel we know, and the experiences shape our meaning and our understanding. Professional is how we connect that meaning to our professional lives and promote the value of empathy and the practice of connectivity. And I actually draw attention to this as a practice of connectivity. It's an idea, but it must be practiced. And how these combine to inform a pedagogical identity, teacher identity, a learner identity that is defined by the relationship between the equation of the self. It must begin with the self, reach to the other in order to form a praxis of the self-other. And in that last little graphic of the self-other, I think we see the one of the underlying principles of peace building, which is empathy, to be able to see yourself in the image of the other, and for the other to see you in their own image. So today, what can I say? The International Committee of the Red Cross tell us that there are over 120 armed conflicts around the world. This involves 60 states and 120 non-state armed groups. The majority of these conflicts are of a non-international character, the number of which has tripled since the turn of the millennium. What this does tell us is that the vast majority of conflicts which are taking place in our world today, over 80%, in actual fact, according to the Organization for Identity and Cultural Development, are based on identity politics. And identity politics really relates to the sort of fabric of culture, which is I'll be talking about in a little while. So I thought that before we look at some examples of practice, maybe to talk a little bit about the sort of history and how we got here. The United Nations, which was formed after World War II, was by and large grew out of the League of Nations, and UNESCO particularly was formed to try and prevent conflict emerging and growing. It hasn't worked too well, it has to be said, but in its work, it sees 4 generations of peace building. The first, peacekeeping, is conflict management, addressing the impact of direct violence. Direct violence is what we see, for example, when we turn on our TV screens and we see what's going on in Gaza or in Ukraine at the moment and in other parts of the world. Direct violence normally follows conflict keeping or peacekeeping normally follows a cessation of violence, which is seen in a sense of a long-term ceasefire. And that's an agreement by the main protagonist to the conflict to work for a long-time resolution, which leads to the next stage and generation of peace building, which is conflict resolution. This addresses the needs to mediate differences between parties. It often occurs, sadly, and certainly in the case of Northern Ireland, it occurs when one or more party realize they cannot win the war or they're exhausted by the killing. It provides what conflict theorists describes as a ripe moment. This can result in the negative peace that Galtung draws attention to. Conflict prevention addresses the foundations of conflict, including structural violence, Structural violence is seen in how society is organized. It can be in policy, and it can also be in how education is delivered, designed, and delivered. I see education actually as a real key point of structural violence, as it tends to, as the education systems which I recognize and being part of, they tend to focus on maintaining the status quo. And if we look at what the status quo is today, it's not a good picture. And certainly the status quo is something which needs to be broken and needs to be ruptured and reformed around a new way of thinking. This does require a complete interrogation of society, of societal and political structures, and very much so including education. Conflict transformation, which is a more recent term, which comes out of the work of John Paul Lederach, explores the root causes and habituated systems that perpetuate conflict and lead to violence being seen as a cultural norm. And again, coming to my home experience, lived experience of Northern Ireland, violence has become a cultural norm, even to this day. I can recognize how some of the overthrows of the conflict show themselves in everyday life in Belfast and in Northern Ireland at this time. With how young people particularly are treated whenever they step out of line, you could say, in particular communities. They have a term within the paramilitary and within communities such as that called punishment beatings. Punishment beatings are when young people are taken from their home. Sometimes they're beaten by paramilitary groups because they've done something wrong, something that normal kids could be doing wrong. In any other society, they get told off by their parents or told off by the community. In Northern Ireland, it's acceptable to beat these children. And if they continue with their behaviour, it's highly likely they could be shot. This is what they call kneecapping, where children again are taken from their home, brought into an alleyway or close by with the knowledge of their parents and also with the cooperation of their parents to be shot behind the knee. That is seen as a cultural norm. And thereby cultural violence still exists. And I wouldn't be surprised to say, and I think I would be pretty confident to say, that this cultural violence is something which persists in many places emerging from conflict, because violence has become what people have become used to. To transform that, you've got to go into the root causes. You've got to go into the habits and the systems which recognize that as normal and disrupt those. Recently, the United Nations had a meeting in New York as recent as October, and they looked at this new agenda for peace. The first new agenda for peace, NA4P, was designed and delivered, and I think it was in 2009, I think. And now we're looking at it. Oh no, it was actually in it was just after the Berlin Wall fell. And that provided an opportunity for people to really explore how the United Nations could be seen as a force for building peace around the world. The new agenda for peace of this year recognizes some statements of fact which are really pretty horrific, that over 1/4 of the world's population are now living in conflict areas. 1 in 5 children are exposed to extreme violence as a result of ethnic and political violence. Conflict is becoming increasingly complicated. Weaponization of new technologies is leading to a very difficult way of being able to manage conflict and disrupt it. Misinformation and hate speech has become the norm. And I think I'm talking to people the people that are here joining us today from the north of England, particularly, will recognize how that was used in the summer to create the conditions by which violence manifests itself in the street and has led to a number of people spending time in prison as they are now. There is a loss of respect for international law and the governance of peace. And we're going to watch very carefully how that loss of respect, I think, will grow in the coming months and years with what's happened across the Atlantic in the last few days. NA4P recognized 4 main considerations which need to be addressed as a matter of urgency. Diplomacy needs to be focused on peace. So that means that there needs to be a redirection of diplomacy more toward peace building and recognizing the potentiality of conflict to emerge. So diplomats are being asked to be more attuned to peace building rather than international relations per se. To develop a new and more effective approaches to conflict prevention. And I think in this particular moment, this is really important to talk about how art education can play a part in that. Sustainability, work toward a sustainable peace. The sustainability is seen in an onward investment in time and imagination. Finances are important, but they should never drive a peace process, as financial support from external actors is not sustainable. However, transformation of the education system based on movement from this what I call the sort of self or capital-based education system toward a more common gain or common goal, a social growth, may lead to a sustainable peace, moving away from a self-centeredness education system to one which is more social. In my work and in my research, I've identified 11 considerations for peace building, which I think speak very relevantly to art education. Critical, dialectical. Critical is recognition that there's more than one truth. Always provide room for doubt. Equality or equality, recognition that equality is a practice. It's not just a value or an ideal. It is something that needs to be practiced and be conscious of that practice. Transformation, which is dedicated to promoting multiple turns in the road of discovery. Radical, it means to push beyond the norm from what we know. And sometimes this will be met with resistance, be it in institutions or elsewhere. But radicalization of education, that's said for good purpose, is something which I think is really crucial. Dissensual, deliberately disruptive, almost like control devices which are set off within an existing system that question and sow seeds of doubt in the central belief system of those involved in learning. It should be vulnerable. The educator must be part of the story, but never be the story. Rhizomatic, open to encounters with the unknown, and as Leader Act points out, seek out new connections, overlapping disciplines, crossing sectors, and weaving new cultural fabrics, but keep that fabric loose in its weave, so air and possibility can come into it. Contextual, learning situations should be deliberated and connected to the context of people, place, and times. Site-specific, as much as is possible, learning sites should be or connected to real-world issues and situations. Once again, we're talking about people, place, and times. Creative, give rise to new ideas. See the imagination as a moral force. According to Mark Johnston, moral imagination means imagining the full range of possibilities in a particular situation in order to solve an ethical challenge. Never oversimplify and never overpromise. Material. In this, we see two major values, I think, of art and design education: thinking and making. Forming objects are other artistic responses to the learning journey. So what is the materiality of peace? It certainly must go beyond the Nobel Peace Prize. It must go beyond agreements. It must go beyond political doctrine or whatever. It must be seen and realized in the real lives and lived experience of the people who are part of that process. And to cover this particular part of the story, I want to draw attention to, again, my lived experience and what has become my professional experience is the conflict of Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, on the 10th of April 1998, the political leaderships to Britain and Ireland sat down around a table in Hillsborough in Northern Ireland and signed the Belfast Agreement, which is also known as the Good Friday Agreement. Even in the agreement, the people of Northern Ireland couldn't agree. So we have two names for it. Before that, and very interestingly, the agreement itself, the principles were laid out in a document which was sent to every household in the country. I remember it falling on our own doorstep in Belfast at the time and reading through it. What we were asked to do was to consider some of the main points of the agreement and then in a referendum to vote on whether we wanted to endorse the agreement or not. But peace building is done on a landscape of pain, trauma, destruction, and fear and distrust. And the result of that referendum in some way highlights that. So on May the 22nd, 1998, the referendum was held in Northern Ireland over whether we could support the Good Friday or Belfast Agreement. The result was a majority of 71.1% in favour. At the same time, a referendum was held in the Irish Republic, and that produced an even larger majority of 94.4%. The total number of people who voted in both referendums was almost 2.5 million. But interestingly, 724,732 people voted against the agreement. The majority of this number came from the Protestant Unionist community in Northern Ireland. Now, I would never say that number of people were voting to maintain a conflict. I think they were voting because they didn't understand fully, or maybe they did understand, or they recognized that one thing which was up for grabs in this agreement was their own constitutional position as being British, and that frightened them. And they did not trust the people who were signing the agreement or who had constructed the agreement neither. The materiality of peace in Belfast is seen in these concrete and steel walls which surround the city, and also through other parts of Northern Ireland. The walls are over, I don't know, maybe 15 meters in height, and they divide Catholic from Protestant. This is a map of one such wall in Belfast. You can see labeled the Protestant side and the Catholic side. And I put this map in to show where Artes first site-specific college was set up within, say, maybe about 300 or 400 yards from the most notorious peace wall of them all in West Belfast. There remain to this day 100 peace walls, barriers in Northern Ireland. And those walls are there to separate people. And I certainly don't think they bring peace. They may bring security, but they certainly don't bring peace. So I really dislike the term peace wall. But we deliberately chose to set the college up within the shadow of this wall because that's where we felt the work had to be done. And we deliberately chose to set it up within the Protestant Unionist Loyalist community because, again, we felt that's where the work had to start. It isn't where it ends. It's where we felt the work had to start. This is a photograph of our site-specific college in Belfast. We have a front of street project space, plus a studio in a really old Victorian building called the Shankle Mission on the second floor. We share it with a number of artists who are standard artists. They go to their studio and they want to make their paintings and their sculptures and whatever. And our students go there sometimes for 4 months at a time. There's a group there at the moment from our bachelor programs, and they're going to be there up until December, working with local communities. And when you step in to this space, these are the sort of issues which you're going to have to face. And it is a messy business. Sectarianism, direct violence. You're dealing with a lot of broken promises, stereotypes, the pain and the doubt, the lack of trust, even hate. Some of the sectors and the groups we work with are from policing, the security forces, youth national governments, European unions, etc. They're all our key stakeholders in this project. When you come to the local groups, we're looking at people in partnerships, community partnerships, youth organizations, ex-combatants from both sides, Loyalist and Republican side, working with regeneration groups who are trying to take parts of the wall away. And then we talk about the people and their own values and what they expect out of it. These are people that work with us in Belfast to make the project work. Some of our students who have turned up and shown and been part of the program in Belfast over the last couple of years. And again, this is what it looks like whenever we come to the messiness, or you could say the complicated nature and the complexity of peace building. In the last text, young people, kids from as early as 3 years of age, and you'll see some photographs maybe later of little toddlers working with our students. And that's so important because that generation, have seen in previous research, have been affected by sectarianism as young as 3 years of age. So we start young and we finish old. And some examples of the projects that we've done in Belfast, I've got 3 to show you, and then we can begin to wrap up. First thing we do, be it in Belfast or Rabat or in Arnhem, our starting point is to announce our presence. We do this through a series of streets conversations. We work with Scottish artist Roddy Buchanan, who has developed this direct contact engagement work, which basically means going directly to people and working with them and talking to them and having conversations and inviting them to be part of a process of dialogue. He throws a dart with the students at a map of a local area, and through what Roddy terms as a derive, the students encounter many unknowns, including meeting new people, often in their home places or on the street. This line, which is drawn from the map, from the center of the map, is where the studio is based. Wherever the dart lands, there's a line drawn and you have to walk that line. And it does literally bring you through people's houses. You have to knock the door and ask them if they would be happy to let you walk through. And of course, some will, some won't, some keep the doors closed. But those who do ultimately end up in a conversation where stories are shared and collected, sometimes images are made, and eventually all this data is crafted into a collective narrative of that moment in time, as you can see on the right-hand side. The subjects of the research, that is the people themselves, are invited to join the students and see the result of the work. That often is the bridge to further collaboration, as we'll see in a moment. One of the students took the notion of doubt to a new level and introduced this concept of a doubt club. It was born out of a series of meetings of disassociated young people living in the shadow of the Peace Wall in West Belfast. Disassociated means they're not in a youth organisation or in a club. They by and large are walking the streets or wandering the streets. These are the sort of young people that the paramilitaries deem as vulnerable, as potential for creating disturbance or antisocial behaviour. The project encouraged the establishment of new commons, new groups in the form of clubs that would cut across the religious and cultural divide. It promoted questions of doubt, and it was a fundamental aspect of the clubs that these questions were asked and interrogated. Eventually, the clubs produced a series of principles that related to the intercultural dialogues that emerged from the project. Elizabeth, who is an alumni now of the programme for 2 years, has now adopted that methodology and she's used it in her home country in Germany. She's also used it in Lebanon. And just to underpin the importance of that, I draw on Amos Oz again and say that his comment, where there is no doubt, there is no empathy. And where there's no empathy, there can be no peace. What was interesting about the outcome of this particular project with Elizabeth was it did bring this group together, and they formed an organisation or a youth organisation called Our City, or they worked with an organisation called Our City now. And the group are now ongoing. They continue to work. As I said, we have students in Belfast at the moment, and they're also now working with the Our City community and youth organisation. We are here. There's a piece of work made by Layli Rashidi from Iran. Layli was really driven by her own research interests into the invisibility of women. Layli was sensitive to the reality that women rarely, if at all, are represented in the numerous murals around Belfast. Layli also then decided to interview a number of local women who were part of the initial direct contact research project that you've seen by Roddy Buchanan. So that shows you that that initial project led to this major piece of work being made, which is in direct reflection of the Peace Wall in West Belfast, as we'll see in a moment. The women came from different walks of life. They all shared their lived experience with Layli of living in the shadow of the Peace Wall. The resulting 40-foot painting was made in public domain in one of the hottest Junes that I've ever seen in Belfast. And Layli worked through the heat outside. And during that time, Layli had multiple conversations with particularly young girls who turned up in this waste area to talk to her. And they wanted to know more about her. They wanted to know more about her country. They wanted to know about her art. And they wanted to know what the inspiration was for the piece of work. And some of them were inspired so much that they came and started to work with her, as you'll see in a moment, on the project itself. So on the top left, in the black and white image, is the Peace Wall, the most notorious of all, in Cooper Street in Belfast. And on the left-hand side is another fence, and behind that fence lies Layli's painting, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. And I put that little slide in of the which is a Republican mural actually in another part of Belfast, of what is normal in these societies, in these communities, is to see men with guns on walls being celebrated in one way or another. Some of them have masks on. This particular painting, they don't have masks on. But you can also see the little girl in the red going past this. And I often wonder, it's been part of my research actually, to see this as a public pedagogy and see these murals of what does it tell us? What does it teach? What does it do in terms of influencing the mind of that young girl as she passes by? And then we look at what Layli's produced and we can ask the same questions. What does this teach us? What does it do? And what's the intention of it as those young girls who worked and came with Layli over that period of 1 month in the summer asked? Final piece of work I wanted to draw attention to was a non-violent kitchen table. The reason why is because I used it just the other day to give me some prompts for this conference and for the speech. Also because it's a bloody good project. It's as simple as that. The non-violent kitchen table was made by one of our Russian students, Paulina, who just escaped Moscow before she was going to be arrested by the regime and made her way to the Netherlands. She's now an asylum. She now has been granted asylum here in the Netherlands. And Paulina produced this piece of work, which was really based on her anger, frustration, and deep, deep sadness and feelings of guilt about what was going on at that time in Ukraine. And she invited people to come and join her in a conversation around the table to make little objects, to play with clay, whatever it may be. But the objects were not really what this was about. This was about conversations and creating a safe space for difficult conversations to be had. In her project, which was set up in the Belfast city centre, over 20 to 30 people attended over a period of 3 days. All were filmed with their permission, and all in some way touched on some of the core lived experiences of those people and were connected through the conversation with Paulina to what was going on at that moment in time in the Ukraine. So I used the non-violent kitchen table method in Arnhem a few days ago with the students, but also in Belfast a few weeks ago when I was back visiting and preparing for the bachelor program to go. And I asked the question that we're asking in a way. Peace may be our title, but really the question is, what is peace? One of my colleagues from Queen's University said, I was watching my daughter doing the things that I was not able to do. Drawing reference to the lived experiences, she's around the same age as me that I had. There were certain things we just could not do in Belfast while growing up there in the 70s, 80s and 90s, like taking a walk into the city centre at night. The feeling that I get when I'm in nature, I'm one of the students here in Arnhem. Peace begins inside. If you're not at peace with yourself, you will find it hard to be at peace with others. Peace may be more than the mere absence of war. And that comes from Nelson Mandela. Peace is not what we know. He wasn't in Arnhem, but that's a very famous reference from Mandela. Peace is not what we know, it's what we want to know. Peace is a process. It's in a perpetual state of becoming. And just to draw attention to something which really impacts on me is those words of Yemen Saws, where there is no empathy, there can be no peace. Therefore, empathy must be present. And it's present, I think, in this little graphic, which is what I want to sort of close with, recognizing that we really have to work hard to be able to see ourselves and others. We need to change the system in some way. It's challenging work. It's not easy work. It's messy. It's complicated. And to do so, we need to embrace the complexity of difficult conversations and dialogues. And finally, I'm going to give the last slide to my countryman, Seamus Heaney. At the end of his poem, The Harvest Poem, he said, the end of art is peace. The end of art is peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I was consciously just leaving a moment then. It felt it needed just a moment. At least. We've got a few minutes for some questions now or comments. And we've also got, John is going to join us for this session later on today. If you want to use the chat facility to pose any questions, just got a response from Penny Hay just saying thank you so much, John. If you want to put in any questions into chat or just to raise comments, we can take those throughout the day and we can bring those back for John in the later session. I think sometimes it's very difficult to respond immediately with such a rich and full set of ideas. Somebody's noting that the projects are very moving and there's a lot to think about.
I think it's important just to say that I genuinely think the source of all this work, that we do is to touch on on what it is that drives us. What it is that gets us to do this work. I think we've all recognized that art education is something which has been constantly marginalized. And I work with students from all over the world, and the first few weeks of working with them here in Arnhem, I asked them to compare their experiences of education. And the comparisons from China, Taiwan, to the United States, UK, France, the Netherlands are very similar. All draw attention to the fact that they're schooled, that they're not really involved in an education process. They're schooled. They're in a system which is telling them what to do and what to think. And they don't have the opportunity to find their own voice. And that's why, I was fortunate to be sent to this school in Lewisham. I remember when I first went to it, I didn't feel so fortunate. Well, what am I doing here? But it was a big, comprehensive school. It was full of all the problems of inner city London that presents it. But some of the things which I learned and seen there were absolutely stunning and beautiful. And it really drew my attention to the potentiality of what we can do. And I think that connection, and I know I was reading Penny Hayes, thinking about, this importance of connectivity and connection is crucial. But it's not just the connection between the outside world. It's also the connection between our inside world. And that's why I see that the professional experience and professional judgments that we make need to be understood and consciously understood by what it is we do on our inside, by where it's coming from. So that connection between the self and the other is crucial. And then I think the next step is really to move toward that sort of last graphic, that self-other. And it's not easy work. There's so many times. Yeah, I was thinking about this when how do I present this? My first real encounter of conflict, of difficulty, of violence was as a very young boy. Before the troubles, the so-called troubles, conflict in Northern Ireland emerged, I was surrounded by a group of young boys, other young boys who, by accident of birth, happened to be Protestant. By accident of birth, I happened to be Catholic. And I'd go in to buy some sweets or candy with my brother on a Friday night with what we used to call our pay, given to us by my mum and dad. And they seen us walking into the neighborhood. And they seen me had walked from a Catholic neighborhood. And they surrounded us. And I remember distinctly, even as young as I was, I remember distinctly trying to negotiate my way out of it. And the negotiation went something around, why would you want to do this? What's the point? It was something as simple as that. Why would you want to hit me? What's the point of that? But I remember looking into the eyes of the leader of that gang and going, I'm not going to convince him. It's not going to work. And I knew he was going to hurt me. And so he did. And unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately, I don't know, depends on your view on it. I've seen that look in so many people's eyes in the years, but I've also seen the look of possibility. The vast majority of people do not want this. The vast majority of people want to live in some sort of sense of peace, whatever that may be. And Galtung once said as well, I used him a lot, if you were to understand what it's like to be in a war, you would definitely choose not to be. Which worries me a lot about what's going on in the Middle East at the moment. Because if there's one country which understands what it is to be in a war, it's Israel. But they constantly choose to be in that perpetual state of conflict. I don't understand that.